just fascinating, and it encompasses everything, and there's hardly a subject that isn't involved. A lot of maths with beekeeping. It's nice gentle smoke, and it goes on a long time once you get it alive. Well, bees are insects, and pesticides are designed to take out pest insects, but they're pretty indiscriminate. Which has got a grill across it that allows the worker bees to go through, but it's too narrow for the queen.
The majority of the samples contain concentrations which are high enough to have an effect on the bees. Probably not to kill them, at least not quickly, so below the lethal dose, but enough to do them other forms of harm, so-called sublethal effects. So we know, for example, that these chemicals, they attack the brain of the insects and they interfere with their ability to learn and to navigate, which is really important for a bee, a honeybee and other kinds of bee. They have to be able to find their way to and from patches of flowers and back to their hive. And if they get lost, then they're as good as dead.
Could I film you walking up the garden?
Also, we know these chemicals at really low concentrations mess up the immune system of the honeybee, so that then they get infected with diseases. So the long and the short of it is that we should be worried about this, that it seems that a large proportion of the world's honeybees, and probably other bees too, are being continually exposed to toxins at a level that will be doing them harm. In Europe, the most common way to use them is to stick them on the seed, and they're systemic. So the idea is the farmer buys the seed pre-coated with insecticide, he sows it in the ground, and the chemical is water soluble. It dissolves into the soil and the water in the soil, and then it's supposed to be sucked up by the plant, and it goes to all parts of the plant, including, unfortunately, the nectar and the pollen. Which then means that when a bee comes along to pollinate that crop, if it's a flowering crop like oilseed rape or sunflower or whatever, then the bee is inevitably going to get a dose of the insecticide.
They're all sisters and daughters of the queen.
There's also another route of contamination or exposure which seems to probably be more important, and which has only come to light in the last couple of years, and that is that the majority of these chemicals don't get sucked up by the crop. They go into the soil. About 95% of them goes into the soil. And they get into streams and ditches and so on. And then they can be taken up by the roots of other plants, like wildflowers growing next to the crop, or hedgerow plants growing in the field boundary. And it turns out that wildflowers growing in arable farmland also have these neurotoxins in their pollen and nectar. So the bees, whether they visit the crop or whether they visit wildflowers growing nearby, either way, they're getting this constant drip feed of insecticide.
They've stuck it together. And now going into these boxes here contain honey.
Most people who live in cities think that the countryside is where the wildlife lives, but for bees at least, that's no longer true. And for other wildlife too, we've seen big declines of farmland birds and butterflies and so on. There isn't actually much life in industrial farming and intensively farmed land, whereas parks like this one can actually be teeming with life. Our gardens can be full of wildlife, and that actually is a positive thing, we can say. Actually, you can do a lot to encourage wildlife in your backyard and provide a refuge for these important insects.
Half full of nectar.